attending tonight's event, for attending this forum about the energy future of Puerto Rico. My name is Carol Werner. I am the Executive Director of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. We are a nonprofit located here in Washington that was started over 30 years ago by a bipartisan congressional caucus that was very concerned about solving energy and environmental issues, problems, and looking to provide for environmentally sustainable development. I will be moderating tonight's event. We have a wonderful panel that will be discussing issues, and we look forward to a very robust discussion. First of all, I would also like to thank Adil Sepulveda and Daniel Vasquez, organizers of tonight's event, as well as the Environment and Energy Management Institute of George Washington University for all of their help and support in making tonight's event possible. There are other people and organizations of the Puerto Rican diaspora that have been involved in the organization of tonight's event, and hopefully you have already found more information about them in the bio document that was available at the registration table, as well as on the Facebook event page for tonight's event. And finally, we would like to provide a salute to the people in Denver and other locations who are watching this event through a live stream. As we all know, tonight's event comes in the wake of one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent history for Puerto Rico. As we know, Hurricane Maria caused catastrophic and widespread destruction throughout the Caribbean, bringing down the entire electric grid of the island of Puerto Rico. Government officials have indicated that it could take up to 6 months or more to restore power to all households in the island. Therefore, this disaster does create an opportunity for Puerto Ricans to rebuild a grid that would be resilient and revolutionary in an island that has been prone to big earthquakes, hurricanes, and other natural hazards. Tonight's forum, then, will discuss the disaster response of federal and state government agencies, and then we'll begin to analyze initiatives, solutions, policies, and case study examples from the perspective of different stakeholders inside and outside the territory to build a resilient and smart electric grid, which can be the example for other islands around the world. We must take this problem and begin to provide a better solution for all. As we all know, one part of tonight's event is raising funds for the organization Casa, Pueblo. For all those interested in learning more and donating to this organization in Puerto Rico, please see our organizer, Adil, and others who are at the registration table. We will start tonight's forum showing a short video message from Arturo Massol, Assistant Executive Director of Casa, Pueblo, and who is also professor at the Department of Biology at the University of Puerto Rico. He will provide more information about the work of Casa Pueblo in the aftermath of Maria, as well as some of their renewable energy initiatives for communities in the mountains of the island of Puerto Rico.
I am Arturo Massol from Casa Pueblo, a community-based organization that has been dealing with forest conservation, natural resource conservation for 37 years. We are also engaged in educational activities. We built a school inside a forest so people can go, students from different ages, and learn from the forest, learn about sustainability, to learn about science, mathematics, and other elements that are needed in order to move forward to a different future. We're also engaging in educational activities in the arts, a school of music in which more than 100 students from, again, different ages will go to Casa Pueblo to learn about different instruments, how to play them, music, and to perform at some point for the community. With regard to energy, Casa Pueblo is a self-sustained organization economically and energy-wise. For almost 20 years, we have been running with solar power. When it was really a new technology coming out, people were very skeptical. The prices were really high, and yet we thought it was what ought to be done to change our reality, and we have been pushing for major changes in how Puerto Rico is being run energy-wise. It is frustrating when we see what is coming from the top to the bottom, when we see the initiatives from the government, private sector, PREPA, the Puerto Rico Power Authority, that actually channels most of those activities, and we are in a very complicated situation. An outdated energy system, very sensitive, unstable, vulnerable, and we have a great depth. And if we can tell our sons and daughters that we are in a great depth because we have a great energy system, that will be something good, something to be proud of. But we are in a very difficult bankruptcy for an energy system that is failing to provide Puerto Rico a great service. And that is a shame, because there is a track record of corruption, misusing funding for initiatives that there's not a proven well-being for the people, but for private contractors in many instances. So we need to change that. And it is also kind of difficult to understand, but people in Puerto Rico, they sort of lack hope on what PREPA can do for our island. There's a general frustration, a sense that for many communities that after Hurricane Maria, power will never be restored because they don't trust. Or perhaps it will be restored at some point, but there's no hope in people. There's no expectations for many, which is an indicator of a really deep problem. Not only on the administrative point of view, but on the people that need to be served. So Casa Pueblo, with regard to energy, we have been running with solar power, as I told you, for almost 20 years. We run our house, our radio station. We have a really upgraded system from last year. We can produce up to 13 kilowatts hour. We have storage capacity. The whole system was okay before, during, and after Hurricane Maria. So far, we have been an energy oasis for the people that goes to Adjunct, which is the only place that have regular power, let's say. Some houses might have power generators, but regular energy supply, Casa Pueblo is the only one so far that I know in Adjunct, my hometown, that have power. And people will go there to connect their phones, their equipment, to recharge them, even for therapy, to connect their respiratory equipment. And you might see, if you go to Casa Pueblo at some point, someone in one corner getting therapy because there's power, and it's not noisy, you don't have emissions, and it's a good thing. But we need to engage in changing that energy agenda from the bottom up. We don't have control. We don't have the political power from the top to the bottom. Many of the decisions are being imposed, and that's what we see. So we need to change that reality, and the way we can do it is from the bottom up. So we're going to push for a transition, not a transition, a switch to clean energy sources, and we have plenty of sun. So we're going to promote 50 with sun. We think we can be, at this stage, we can run the country 50% with solar power. Let's say we can help houses at the point of consumption to produce their own energy and build hybrid systems in which if the central generation collapses, like after Maria and after Irma, the previous hurricane, and after a lightning event, and after multiple things, the energy system is collapsing, we need to have more resilient families and communities, and we can achieve that in part if people can generate part of their consumption at their houses to run basic equipment like refrigerators and equipment, lighting for security and for well-being. And I think we can do that from the bottom up, help communities to reach a different energy state. The grid, when we think about the grid that is going to be rebuilt after Hurricane Maria, rebuilt for what? For one-way direction from central generation to consumers? We need to change that as well, because a lot of limitations have been stated by the PREPA that people cannot use it because it was not designed and it has technical limitations. Well, this is a time to deal with those technical limitations because we need the grid. We need to build microgrids, and we need to have the grid going both directions, not a one-direction thing like right now. Central generation, which is outdated, obsolete with fossil fuels, either bunker, natural gas, coal, all of them are responsible for climate change. So we need, it is a responsibility, it's a humanitarian mandate that we move away from that when we have plenty of alternative energy sources that are clean, available, free for Puerto Rico, and we have to work with our economical reality that we need to avoid drainage of resources in painful fuels that are being produced elsewhere, and it is creating jobs elsewhere but not in Puerto Rico. We need to change that situation. And embracing solar power might help, and that's our commitment to promote an energy agenda that will produce energy at the point of consumption in which the benefit will be for the local people first, like producing energy at the roof of public buildings, like schools that are closed 3 months a year and could potentially be small power plants for the community as well. This is something that we're going to keep pushing, as I told you, and your help is very important. Of course, the energy agenda is more complicated than that. And hopefully you will be discussing that and ways to help envision a different country. Casa Pueblo is committed to help and to promote an alternative energy agenda for our island. We have been doing that for 20 years, and we're going to keep doing that. So far, after Hurricane Maria, we have distributed up to more than 6,000 solar lamps to help quality of life for the elderly, for the children, for the family, and it is an educational tool. We're helping to mitigate the consequences of Hurricane Maria with solar lamps, but people are learning, and they know now that they can produce energy at their house for specific services. We're going to move to the next phase, which is to install small energy solar system with a refrigerator to help keep food safe and medicine and improve quality of life as well. And move forward, because if something is critical about this new alternative is the diversity of options. that can be integrated in our landscape, and diversity is resiliency, and we want that. Thank you again, and hopefully you will have the chance to come to Puerto Rico at some point. I want to invite you to visit Casa Pueblo. I'm grateful to the people who are organizing this. They were in Casa Pueblo a few weeks ago, and they said they were going to do this, and it is amazing that it is being done. And we need to perform. We need to do it. Again, we have a lot of people who are in a critical situation, and we need to change this reality, not only to deal with Maria, but for future disasters. We're in the Caribbean. Hurricanes will come back at some point. So thank you again, and my regards to everyone. Have a good night. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share what we have been doing and for gathering.
What Arturo said is so compelling. He made so many important points, and I am sure that our other discussants tonight will be raising some of these very issues as well. But I hope that we all feel the same sort of commitment that certainly Arturo is putting into this, and that I think we should all feel a huge obligation to help him be successful, to further his whole vision about how to move forward in terms of solving this enormous problem in Puerto Rico. So for our first presenter tonight, I want to turn to Miguel Román, who is a research physical scientist in the Terrestrial Information Systems Laboratory at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. Ramón is the principal NASA scientist for the VIIRS Day-Night Band on SWAMI NPP and oversees the development of NASA's Black Marble product suite. At the agency level, Dr. Ramón serves as part of NASA's Disasters Response Program, where he works directly with technical and program staff from 6 NASA centers, as well as JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The program targets a wide spectrum of disasters and is tasked with representing the agency during national and international emergencies, where NASA satellite data and products can be used to improve situational awareness and inform decision-making. And I think NASA's work and how it has advanced has been so profoundly important in terms of improving our knowledge and our response efforts. Miguel?
If you wait 2 more weeks, we'll print out 10,000 copies from time for AGU. Yeah. Sorry, you're late. All right, so thank you, everybody. This is a great initiative. I'm very honored to be here with all the diaspora of Puerto Rico. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about, I would like to imagine like as if we had a guest from outside, from another planet, who hasn't heard about Puerto Rico and Maria. And we're going to go through a little tour of what happened prior to Maria, after Maria, and all the way to today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show what has been done on the part of NASA, as well as a lot of federal agencies and partners that we work with through the National Science and Technology Board and its Subcommittee on Disaster Reduction. And what we're going to show you is a lot of the data that resulted from these activities. This is just a little background on our program at NASA and the way it's structured. NASA is not an operational disaster response organization. We're a science-enabling agency. We do have operational members here present, like NOAA. We have folks who actually have to spend nights, and they get paid overtime to do that. And we work with these team members, and we try to answer research questions when sometimes we hit a wall. And we do tier modelizations. What does that mean? We get CNN reports about an impending disaster like a California wildfire. We look at the information, and then we look at end users who are seeking out for support. And we work with different international bodies that are trying to exploit all these observations from space for the benefit of humanity. And this includes some of these like the CEOS, the Committee of Observation Satellites, the Group on Earth Observations, and most importantly, the International Charter on Space and Major Disasters. This is a very important body because it allows all countries to get access to free and openly accessible products in periods of need. So suddenly you get digital globe data for free. You get radar sat data from Canada for free. You get Cosmos Skynet data for free over a specific area where there's response needed. And so we go through different tiers, and our agency decides to make commitments both in terms of personnel and financial by contributing different types of infrastructure. That could be airborne measurements. We're scheduling airborne measurements after Irma over the Everglades to examine the ecological impacts following Irma. So we do a lot of different things, but we can't just do enough. We don't save lives. If I were to want to save lives, I would join the Army Corps or other people, other agencies that really are on the ground, boots on the ground doing that. Our work is to provide the data and the tools needed to make their work easier, and to develop technology that would break away the difficulties associated with disasters. So I didn't talk to the talking points, and I promise this will be the last bullet point that you'll see, bullet side that you'll see today. So what happened during Maria? Well, we had a significant amount of both hurricane-based winds. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to do this from here. Let's see, do I have to click that? An important factor in, and this is supposed to be an animation, but doesn't work, it doesn't matter. An important factor when looking at hydrometeorological disasters related to water, wind, is that you have to track precipitation. You have to track very fundamental parameters that impact vulnerability. The first thing you need to know is where the water is going to go. The second thing you need to know is where have any buildings being affected as a result of that hydrometeorological process, be that not just flooding, but also wind damage. It could be additional cascade effects like landslides, you name it. And so one of the things that NASA has done is to develop an observatory that measures not just where the clouds are, as I was showing in the first slide. You can see the eye going through Macau, but you can also see precipitation, the actual rainfall rate. And this is supposed to be running through Maria, and you can see all the precipitation rate, and you can see the legend on this side, but we'll post this online and you'll see the animation, so sorry for the glitch. Once you have some information about the amount of precipitation across the entire island and its different areas, you can get flood maps. And the issue with flood mapping, it's dual in that if you're using optical data, like pictures, taking pictures, and the clouds are in front of you, then you can't see any water over the surface. But if you have radar data, you can measure changes in the surface, and you can then relate that to the extent of water at the surface. So what you're seeing here is the first obtained map of flood extent, and you can see that they follow all the major rivers across the northern side of Puerto Rico, including La Plata, and all the other plains around Salinas and Guayanilla and all these other sectors. Loíza, was pretty much flooded even before the main tails of Maria came through. And so this is the first map that FEMA gets. And now they're trying to position equipment, personnel, they're trying to send the Civil Air Patrol, and of course they want more data. So what is it that you do? This is all the assets that NASA had, but those are not the only assets that are available in space. This is an image provided with raw data from the European Commission, the ESA Copernicus program. We work through the State Department to get access and do an activation of the disasters charter. Once that happens, we get free SAR data from the Europeans. And as a result, our colleagues at JPL are able to process this data by looking at an interferometric retrieval, which gets you deformation. So if the ground is moving, you can assess damage. And so what you can do here is you can see places like Cataño, where there's not only the extent of water, but you can actually start pinning down the buildings that have been destroyed as a result of the actual wind damage or the surge in the coastal areas that are very vulnerable. This is another example in Mayagüez, and I want to hone in on El Barrio El Maní, where you can start seeing detailed assessments of damage. And again, if you're on the back office at FEMA and you're cutting checks for people that lost their homes, this is very valuable data, because it shortens down the period of recovery, and you can give the resources quickly. And so we are working with FEMA to provide these maps operationally in the coming months. Every time there's a disaster, we task, and we have to work and be very nice with other countries to get this data. Now, 4 years from now, be nice with the Italians, be nice with the Japanese and the Canadians, because they're providing us free data. 4 years from now, NASA will launch a mission called NISAR. And NISAR will provide measurements like these globally on a routine fashion. But between now and then, we have to play nice. What happens when data like this gets ingested? This is not the final stream in terms of results. A lot of operational agencies then basically amass all this information, and they have their own expertise in geospatial technology to create their own value-added maps. And here are some examples and testimonials of where they're taking their SAR data and they're taking the flood data, bringing it together and saying, Civil Air Patrol, please fly over these areas. And we're trying to get this done quickly. We're trying to get a measure of damage assessment within the first 10 days after Maria. Because after 10 days, if people lose their homes and you're still mapping Puerto Rico and there's people still without water, what's the point? We got to get those damage maps out quickly. After doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some experimental products, stuff that FEMA is kind of like, well, this sounds promising, but maybe in 5 years, the technology will mature, and we'll be able to use this routinely the way we use SAR data. And one of those technologies is night vision technology using VIIRS. This is an instrument on board the Sumi MPP satellite. If you want to wake up tomorrow morning, on Saturday, we'll be launching JPSS-1 out of Vandenberg Air Force Base. Hopefully, there won't be any wind shear this time. And this satellite was launched in 2011, it provides a whole slew of measurements. And one of the measurements that are providing that are quite new and innovative is the ability to measure night lights at the nighttime part of the orbit. So what you're seeing in yellow here are city lights from San Juan, the San Juan metro area, immediately following the aftermath of Katrina. And the area in blue is the area where there's clouds. So we have to be very careful on how to report this data, because if there's cloud contamination and you don't account for it, suddenly the entire area around Quebradillas, which is undergoing evacuation because of the failure of the Oaxaca Dam, suddenly shows as if everybody's gone. And you don't want that to happen. So you have to have maps like these, which control the quality of the information to ensure that you can improve the confidence in the results. So a lot of the work that I do, 80% of my work is obsessing about how to improve the quality of this map, so that in the future, we're able to use this to improve situational awareness. And it's not just me, it's a bunch of people, including NOAA colleagues, folks in Huntsville, Alabama, you name it. The other thing that we can do once you stabilize the quality of these observations, and I'm going to go through these slides because I always obsess about all the retrieval and how it's done, is you can downscale the emissions from lights down all the way to street lights. And so what you're seeing here is what we call the black marble in high definition. This was some data that came as a result of our response activities. And I'll be talking a little bit about what we do to get here, but in order to tell you how we do that, first I need to give you some introductory courses in remote sensing. So what is going on? How do we detect data at night? Well, what happens is we have all these sources of light that reflect naturally and end up in our satellite. And what we're trying to capture is anthropogenic nighttime sources. We don't want to get data that suddenly looks like, you know, a tree or snow. Well, of course, that's not going to be a problem in Puerto Rico. I hope not. So, yes, and we have to build models that describe how much light we're seeing versus how much natural light we're seeing, so that we can actually come up with an accurate estimate of damage. Another thing that we have to account for is vegetation, because it turns out there are these things known as trees that get in the way of you looking at streetlights. I know. So this is a place that Dr. Carlos de Castillo is really a place that you may know really well. This is La Parguera, before and after. And one thing that really impacted me about this image is that now I can see the cars, and I can see 10 times more houses than before, which means that now I have a nighttime record that may actually be positively biased, because now I'm going to see more light, because now there's no trees to occlude the lights. And so we have to be models of geometric remotes and, you know, geometric radiated transfer and canopy optics to account for these effects. When you do all that, and you validate your measurements, meaning that you take a huge flashlight, you go into the middle of the Pitayas farmland in Cabo Rojo, you put it on a 30 square meter tarp, and you shine the actual satellite, blip, and it goes day 1, day 2, blip, and day 3, and you establish the absolute accuracy of your measurements, and you're doing this together with NGOs and universities locally in Puerto Rico, then you can use this data. So you can do that. You can measure the individual light. Remember, we could see a flashlight, so we can see street lights. This is for the whole metro area, and I'm putting San Pablo Hospital and the Puerto Rican, La Carretera Vieja, PR1, all the way to Caguas. Caguas is completely gone. This is immediately after Maria. This is not how it looks like right now. And that's pretty much all the results that we have. I'll put in some links on the latest data. So what's the takeaway here? There's a ton of data that the federal agencies are collecting. And my message is pretty much follow what Dr. Massol was saying, which is like, we have a challenge. We need microgrids, and we need to augment our core infrastructure. It has to be a mix. He went off to say it has to be a hybrid. But the issue is not just about energy. There is a confluence of climate change, urbanization, and energy agendas. No barrio in Puerto Rico right now is safe, is sustainable, and is resilient. That's what we need to work at right now, those 3 factors. We need to work also at the appropriate scales at which vulnerability is taking place. We have 2 of our leaders, very charismatic leaders, Mayor Cruz and Governor Rosselló. Governor Rosselló is working at the national level, working with the federal agencies. We're working at this level. Mayor Cruz is working at the individual to community level. And we have to have leaders that, when Massol is talking about the gap between the bottom and top, we need to have leaders like Casa de Pueblo who are at the middle and are willing to integrate across these different philosophies of managing a disaster. That's just, and to do that, our job, and by I mean NASA, our only job is to provide you with the data and the tools that you're going to need in order to be able to address those science questions at that community scale. That's what we can do. And this is not just an issue about Puerto Rico. This is our commitment as a country, as a nation, to a set of sustainable development goals to make our communities safe, resilient, and sustainable. And that's it. That's my talk. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you so much. And that was fascinating in terms of looking at those images, and also frightening. We're now going to turn to Scott Sklar, who is the president of the Stella Group, which is a strategic technology optimization and policy firm. And Scott is also an adjunct professor here at George Washington University, where he teaches 2 quite unique interdisciplinary sustainable energy courses, and Scott is also an affiliated professor with Katie in International Graduate Sustainability University in Costa Rica. Scott chairs the steering committee of the Sustainable Energy Coalition. In 2014, he was awarded the prestigious Charles Greeley Abbott Award by the American Solar Energy Society, and also in 2014, he received the Green Patriot Award from George Mason University in Virginia. Scott serves as the vice chair of the U.S. Department of Commerce Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Advisory Committee. Scott?
Thank you. Wear this. Okay. I'll just hold up like this. And I got my button. Unbelievable. Well, first, on behalf of George Washington University, thank you for being here. I am the energy lead for the Environmental Energy Management Institute, your host tonight, and we do a lot of work all over the world. My company, I blend all these clean technologies together. So I'm not tied to a manufacturer, component supplier. And I'm called into a lot of international disasters. Katrina, I've been to Puerto Rico since the hurricane, and I thought Katrina was horrible, and it was. This is horrible by 2. So you know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But I want to sort of lay the energy, sustainable energy side for you. That's my business, and that's what I teach. So last year, 2016, was the first year in history that more than half of all all electricity on this planet, of new electricity brought on in 2016, came from renewable energy. That is a landmark, all right? So I just want you to understand, in the United States during that year, we brought in 22 gigawatts of renewable energy, or 22 nuclear power plants worth of electricity in renewables. So this is a very interesting time to be alive. Now, I'm showing you a picture of 2013 when a tree fell in Ohio and knocked out 8 states and parts of Canada from 3 days to 3 weeks, causing about $65 billion of lost economic activity. We, of course, blame the Canadians, who didn't know what was going on, but in fact it was human error. A tree limb fell in Ohio, and the system operators of the plant that it happened at, the generation plant, did the wrong thing, and the whole system went down. And it was really the first time in the United States of America we thought about resiliency. Like, duh, this could happen. And by the way, it can still happen, but we've done some things to try to deal with that I'm not going to get into today yet. I have lots of studies. In fact, if you want, any of you who email me, I'll send you the 34 studies I give my students that they have to be aware of in high-value energy efficiency, energy storage, and renewable energy. But this one I love because this is done by the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. They took a look at what are the resources, the renewable resources in every state that can be economically accessed with technology we have today. Not in the future, but today, economically. And these were the states, and you can see 32 states not only could produce all their energy with renewable energy, but could have plenty of excess to give to the other states. And by the way, this study does not include offshore wind or marine and tidal, which is starting to get into the market now. So, and that would change the East Coast pretty dramatically. There's been a change, believe it or not, though you may not have seen it in Puerto Rico yet, but this is a PricewaterhouseCoopers study 4 years ago, which looked at how utility executives look at the future of the electric grid. And the last line is really what I want you to look at. The strong majority, 82% of North American, these are utility respondents, said future energy needs will be met by a mix of traditional centralized generation and distributed generation, which feeds power from a mix of sources. So even the utility industry itself, which is not known to be cutting edge, is starting to move like, hey, there's some options out there. This is also from some years ago, and this is in the Wall Street Journal, no less, which says that, hey, that's for in 7 years, commercial industrial sites have more than quadrupled producing their own energy in the United States from 10,000 to 40,000. Of course, this is part of my business, and I'm here to tell you that in the last 3 years, it's doubled again to over 80,000. So the private sector is beginning to produce its own energy, primarily, by the way, from renewables and energy storage. And I want to remind you, this is a McKinsey chart. I take other people's charts legally, and this is McKinsey. But we are in, this renewable energy stuff, frankly, is part of a whole range of disruptive technologies. This is what I call the third wave. And we started, frankly, with cellular, and I want you to think about that. In 1970, the head of our largest and only phone company said cellular was a whim. Who would spend 15 times more for a unit of service in a country that has 99.9% quality service? I'm here to tell you all of you would, and did, in fact. And because we could get other assets from it. We can get safety, convenience, data, entertainment. And we have not only a wired grid that is a generational difference, we have a wireless grid that is a self-healing grid. When cell towers go down, they retriangulate. And I power them with renewable energy. And I run my renewable systems all over the world tied to them so I can see diagnostically what's going on. And of course, the stuff on the right, the mobile internet, the Internet of Things, cloud technology, all of that is also another self-healing grid. And so that if a data center goes down, guess what? It is triangulated again, and we work around it. And guess what? More and more of them are being powered by renewable energy. Actually, my business as well. So the third wave is, the first wave is bringing communications to the individual. The second wave is bringing information to the individual. The third wave is bringing energy to the individual. We are living that right now. And this is being studied like crazy. This is a 2017 report with the National Academy of Sciences looking at the national electricity system. And I wanted to talk to you about grids. They're all interdependent. We're looking at the electric grid here in Puerto Rico. We're going to talk about that in a second. But, you know, we have electric power lines. We have natural gas and oil pipelines. We have smartphone lines like FIOS, cellular towers, repeaters. We have cable. We have water, sewage, and sewage pipelines. We have railway, roadway, riverways, ports and airports, communication lighting. And we have data centers and internets. And they are all related to each other. In Katrina, my first job was to use on-site renewable power systems to power the water lines, because if you got the wires up, you couldn't start up the thermal power plants because they needed water, as an example. If you didn't get the sewer system working, the first responders couldn't respond because they were getting sewer backups at the police, fire, and ambulance stations. You can't work out of places with sewage backup. So this is all interrelated, and I want you to think about it. And there are lots of studies on microgrid. And we're going to talk about microgrids in a second, but the microgrid market is booming globally. I've done over 80 of them now around the world. I have Alison Archambault somewhere all the way back there, did the first microgrid through her Spark at Haiti. You guys should talk to her. But the fact is, we're going to see more and more microgrids, and they're bringing down the cost of microgrids so it's accessible to everyone. And this idea that everything needs to take place, and our speaker at Casa Pueblo made so clear, you know, in the old days, if you had no choice, you had central station power plants feeding to substations, feeding to distribution lines, and you lose probably about 36% of your electricity from the point of generation to the point of use. And we don't have to do all of that all the time anymore. So what the technology, because of these disruptive technologies, what's going on is we now have the capability with sensors and controls and software to have a host And I want you to get out of this solar thing. Now, and I ran the Solar Industry Association for 15 years. I love solar. That's not the point. It is the elegance is to blend, to optimize all your renewable energy resources and your end-use information so you can maximize energy efficiency, because it's always less expensive to save energy than generate it from any source in a seamless system. That's really what we're talking about. And using battery storage, flywheels, ultracapacitors, compressed air and liquids, even hydrogen as your storage, so you have a lot of technologies. There's a lot of options here. Don't forestall any option, as long as it's clean, reliable, and resilient, okay? Gets back to our NASA speaker. So a little bit about Puerto Rico. So this is sort of the utility side of it. Looking at, this is what they put out. So 2018, this is how much oil, this is how much gas, this is how much coal, this is how much renewables, and this is how much hydro. And from my point of view, that was sort of pretty depressing. So, and the rates, and I just want to point out that Puerto Rican electric rates are the second highest in the United States of America. Hawaii is the top. And by the way, they voted to go 100% renewables. So just a thought. And so these are the rates that published by EIA, Energy Information Administration, Department of Energy for July 2017. And basically, you have in Puerto Rico, let's just say a 5 megawatt grid. That's what you have. That's what's out there. So it's already been talked to. There's a lot of debt there. And the other side that no one's talking about is look at the median age of power plants in Puerto Rico, the U.S., and Hawaii. And that's another problem, is you can't keep these plants going forever, even if times were good. Even if there was no Maria, it doesn't make sense to keep the status quo. And not only that, as with everywhere else in the United States, people are using less electricity. Why? We have LED light bulbs, we have Energy Star appliances, we have smart thermostats, and so you're seeing that the utility sector has flat loads. They're not rolling in money either, anywhere in the United States. And this is a 2017 article in September that you had opened up your coal ash in your landfills, which of course now is being sloshed around on the island because of the flooding, and you're at complete landfill capacity. You can't really have any more coal. You have nowhere to put the coal ash. You're going to send it to New York? I don't think so. So this is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory study, and this is my message to you all. If you remember one thing I say today, is that you have a fabulous resource base in Puerto Rico. You have a 5 megawatt grid. You have, let's just say, an 800 megawatt potential for wind, which, by the way, we can produce equal to mainland natural gas electricity. You have an 1,100 megawatt potential for photovoltaics. Let's just say 1,000. Biomass, I picked the mid-range here. This is just waste. You know, I'm going around in Hawaii, we're looking at landfills, water and sewage treatment plants. What are you putting out? You're putting out methane, one of the most potent greenhouse gases, at least 20 times more potent than carbon, as a result of these plants. Why shouldn't we capture the methane? And you have all these biosolids, which, by the way, you have to put somewhere, and you don't have room for that, and turn them into electricity or industrial thermal energy. And you have double that actually potential, but I'm going midway. So already you're at your 5 megawatt potential. And then what's starting to come in is marine and tidal and wave, marine energy. And there's been $8 billion investment in this industry last year. I've done a world tour of the technology in Scotland, Spain, Australia, Japan, China, and the United States. All these countries are doing it, and actually Scotland is the lead, and it's astounding. 24-hour power does not hurt fish. Astounding. And guess what? I don't want to shock you, but Puerto Rico's an island. It's surrounded by water. Just a thought here. Don't want to get radical on you. So, at any rate, and then lastly, hydropower, NREL says you're at capacity. I'll take their word for it. Geothermal, and I've tried my best to find the geothermal data. I cannot find it. NREL couldn't either. But I know you have geothermal 24-hour power under your island, and there is no reason it cannot be tapped. But we may need NASA to help us figure out how to, your heat sensing satellites there. Well, that's a deal. So I want to point out to you, in the United States of America, just solar energy employs more workers than the extractive industries and fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, and coal. And look at wind. So I'm here to tell you that this is a job creator as well, that the old way is not. So this is Hurricane Andrew in Dade County, and you can see all the roofs ripped off the houses, but the damn solar street lights were still working. And I brought Jorge Sanchez and his son Jorge right here from San Antonio. Their company does sells these things, plus battery banks. But these critical infrastructure run independently by renewable energy is one of the ways to go. This is this is October 2017, and here we're talking about a New Jersey wastewater plant bringing in solar plus storage to keep it going for severe weather. This is one of 100 towns in Japan before Fukushima. Every building produces more energy than it needs. Every single building. And that extra energy goes to run their infrastructure. I have two buildings 7 minutes from here, two-story buildings in Arlington, my home and my office building, totally off the grid, cost-effectively with a blend of technology. I have done 127 buildings around the world, not dinky ones like I have in Arlington, 8 to 25 stories, off the grid, totally with renewable energy. The technology is here. It's just the drive, the will, and to set the rules to do it. So I'm going to flip. So this is the infrastructure, and I'm proposing to you, and I've written an article, in fact, several of them on Puerto Rico, that the new grid needs to be sectionalized with bidirectional sectionalizers and reclosers so that certain parts of each section of the grid can isolate itself. And within each section, you have microgrids or community renewable systems that can also isolate themselves. So within sections, as well as the whole island, just like the cellular towers, just like the data centers, you can passively shut down and keep basic life going. And then, which is the core of my business, you can take this basic infrastructure, not put it on the grid, but actually have dedicated hybrid renewable energy systems that run it. And again, I'm doing 1,100 cell towers in Africa. I've got wastewater and sewage treatment plants, pipeline pumps, all this stuff that actually takes power from the grid and clogs the grid. Get rid of it. Take it off the grid. Make it independent. It's cyber secure, so Putin can't play around with it, and you can have security in the harshest of times. All of this, by the way, is economic, and it's all privately financeable. You don't need a utility company to do it either. So, and in buildings, and I have Jack Warner, my colleague over there, sitting there, knows all about buildings and all the different codes and standards. But we have, the Wi-Fi. In Sandy, we had 4 hospitals that during operations, they had to move people out of operating rooms because the diesel engines didn't work. I'm here to say you've got to get out of diesel engines. It made a lot of sense when you had no options. They make no sense anymore. They don't do what you need to do. Data centers within buildings, sump pumps in buildings to prevent flooding. At least an elevator shaft, HVAC at the lowest level so people can stay in the building. And then at your strip malls, so you have some ATM machines and refrigeration and outpatient care, some gasoline pumps so people can get gasoline in bad times. And unlike New Orleans, where we had people going to the arena, to the only place to stay, power up your local schools. So you have convergence points for first responders or places that people can go if they're displaced. And when the times are good, most of the energy is they don't have to pay for. It's already there. And they use the utilities sort of for the extra stuff. We have lots of financial tools. And I spent some time with some of your folks here who have been in the Puerto Rican government to talk about that. We have a lot of tools. In the private sector, we have leasing, power purchase agreements, shared savings, long-term advertised loans. In the developing world, just pay as you go. And on property assessed valuation, we have lots of different tactics, and we have lots of different players in the foundations and corporate community who would securitize risk, which is what we're going to need to do. And we have tons of new technology. In fact, I'm having this brought to GW. This will be installed in the next month or two. This is Johnson Controls, U.S. largest battery manufacturer in the world. The first battery bank that you can snap out the batteries. You don't need an electrician to change out batteries. You send, I could send the grad student or the janitor. You know, it doesn't matter. We have cell towers now that come with solar, wind, and batteries that we can deploy. Street lights I showed you. There are tons of battery banks. This is AES, actually out of Arlington, one of the multi-billion-dollar companies. This is a 31.5 megawatt battery bank. This is on Hawaii. This is Tesla's battery bank, 13 megawatts with solar. This is a 30 megawatt battery bank in Illinois. So this is a system, World Water and Solar Power out of New Jersey. We put these in Waverly, Mississippi when the water surge washed out Waverly's municipal water pumps. We brought this on a trailer. It's still working there. These are containerized units that run communication systems, and droppable and deployable units, and there are several manufacturers. And emanating from NASA and getting to the private sector, and actually a friend of Allison's and mine here, is there are several companies now using supercomputers, oceanographers, meteorologists, that can pinpoint renewable energy anywhere on the planet, latitude and longitude. Wind at the hub height, where you need to put how high the wind turbine needs to go, or where the best solar, or looking at rooftops and overlaying on Google Earth so you can understand. So now I don't have to travel. I can look at rooftops and see what's on the roof, overlay seasonal and daytime data, and see where the best place to put the panels, either on the roof or on the ground. Doesn't matter. We have the capability to do that. It wasn't around even 7 years ago. So I want to remind you of something. I worked in the Senate for 9 years, and I became good friends with Senator John Glenn, senator from Ohio, first astronaut. I remember in the 70s when I was working up there, I did a solar bill and went on the floor, and I'm walking off the floor, and I walked by the center. Now, I was younger there. I had hair on my head like all of you, and I sort of had a little swelled head, and I look at the center, and I go, I can't believe a senator from a coal state voted for my solar bill. And I walk past him, and he sort of turns me around and says, do you know why I voted for your solar bill? And he said, when I was an astronaut, and I was in space, and I was in an area of the size of a big refrigerator, and back then we were more like monkeys than the modern astronauts, he said, I got a chance to look out in space. Now, I do believe there's life on other planets, but they don't look anything like us. And then I looked at this. And for the first time in my life, I realized we are on this nest. This is it. There is really no place to go. And I said I came back a changed man. So yeah, I come from a coal state, but I will vote for your solar stuff every single time, which you did. So I want to remind us, we are all on this planet together, and we have really stressed this planet out. And many of you who are my age, the world had 2.5 billion people when I was young, and now we're at over 7.4 billion people. We have added 5 billion, and in another 20 years, there will be another 3 billion. So we have some real stressors on this planet, and we have obviously a lot of stress on Puerto Rico. So we are all have to turn this around, no matter what the president says, no matter what the fossil companies say, we have to turn this around. I know we can. We have the technology, we actually have the money, and we have a lot of people that want to help us. So I'm hoping that the brain power here and the will here, we can help drive the agenda of where it needs to go. Thank you very much.
As always, thanks, Scott. And I hope that you all really understand now, in terms of bad as things are, that the opportunities now are enormous in terms of putting together a whole variety of technologies, looking at the terrific renewable resource base that Puerto Rico has, and that we now really need to be about how to put this all back together. So I am now very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who is Tanuj Deora, who joined SEPA in January 2015 to lead SEPA's research, advisory, communications, and programs teams. His previous experience included wind energy project development, research and design engineering, product management, business development, and financial analysis. This is all a lot. For over a decade of experience in renewable energy, after having started his career in the chemical industry. He also served in the cabinet of Governor John Hickenlooper as director of the Colorado Energy Office, and he had also been a Peace Corps volunteer in Jamaica, working on community and environmental health projects. Tanuj has served as an advisor to the Rational Middle Energy Series, as well as serving on the boards of the Colorado Renewable Energy Trust and Renewable Energy New England. Tanuj.
Well, I think it's a beard.
Even that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that is a tough act to follow. Scott is quite a legend in the renewable energy industry, so I'm going to be a little different approach in what I talk about. I was actually asked to speak about SEPA's 51st State Initiative. It has nothing to do with statehood for any particular jurisdiction, either D.C. or Puerto Rico, but it does refer to the idea of using a blank slate approach to thinking about our energy future. SEPA is a 501c3 not-for-profit research education organization. We have about 1,100 different organizations in our membership. Just over half of them are utilities, so I'll probably be a little less condemning of some of the utility behaviors than maybe some of the other speakers. But there is an opportunity to see lots of change in how utilities are doing their business. And we like to think we are the folks who are helping the utilities change from within, helping empower those change agents at the utilities so they can help lead the transition as opposed to be drugged through the transition. I mentioned I was asked to speak about our 51st State Initiative, but in the time since we were asked to speak, and today we actually have gotten involved in some of the recovery work in Puerto Rico, and I'm going to start with a little bit of the data from that. So similar information to what Scott had just presented, slightly different, but similar information. If you look at Puerto Rico, we've got the territory has about 1% of the U.S. population, about 0.5% of the U.S. generation capacity. So from a resource efficiency perspective, you could say on a per capita basis, relatively efficient. It could be characterized other ways as well. But there is significant infrastructure that was there on the island. And then, of course, post-hurricane, we all know there's been some pretty significant devastation. This is from on-the-ground work that Navigant Consulting, who we are a subcontractor to on some of the work we're doing. has looked at. This is maybe a week out of date, but still quite intimidating challenge that, as we all know, the island is facing. One of the challenges that we face when we talk about the energy transition for the island is that there is a real need to deal with the humanitarian challenges that we have. A lot of diesel generators are being put out there because, we got to get people clean water. We have to get people access to the telecoms infrastructure and the hospitals running and the like. And that puts us on the left hand of the chart. We're thinking about emergency power, where folks are putting diesel generators out and really overusing and misusing, per the design specs, those diesel generators, and thinking about just hanging wires over tree limbs and things like that, all the way through to the future, where you'd like to see reaching some of those clean energy targets that the island has put forward. And one of the challenges we have as we think about how we're going to do restoration and rebuild is, how do we actually balance that immediate need to build back quickly and get to, on the flip side, have a infrastructure that is going to be where we want it to be. And so if you think I'll go back, if you think about that is one of the challenges that the government in Puerto Rico, assisted by the government in New York State, have when they're thinking about what to ask for, what to focus and prioritize on in the near term. And the engineers on the ground are folks who've been doing things the traditional way, things that have been done the last several decades. There is not a lot of thinking of going forward about what the future could be. And so you've got a request of about $17 billion for restoration of the power grid that's coming from the governor, advised by the engineers that are on the ground today. The total request is just under $100 billion. That's for all sectors. That's for roads and water infrastructure and housing and the like. But $17 billion, that's for the power grid, and only $1 billion of that $17 billion has been requested for what we call non-traditional energy resources. So distributed energy resources, microgrids, and the like. And again, it goes back to that challenge of we do want to build back better, but how do we calibrate between what we know we can do quickly and what we want to see out there in the future? So SEPA is working on that $1 billion request for the DER and the microgrids, and we recognize that this is a challenge to figure out how this is going to be actually allocated and how it should be deployed, balancing those short-term and those long-term interests. When we think about what the far right of that chart would look like, there are even differences there. So it's not clear that we want to have everyone have their own completely self-sufficient power system, or we want to have microgrids at the community level, or we want to have a segmented system of a dozen or more islandable parts of a macro grid. We also need to think about what kind of future we see with distributed resources versus central resources, whether they're clean or not. We want to think about the role of the consumer. How much of this are we expecting the consumer to lead, and how much are we expecting third parties, and how much are we expecting the utility to lead? So even if we do agree we want to have 50% renewables by 2040, we need to think about what that's going to look like, what that makeup's going to be. And as we're doing that, we want to think about all the societal concerns, not just resiliency, not just environmental sustainability, but the economic impact is real as well. We have an economic challenge in the island, and we want to make sure that we have a power grid that has a cost of energy that is going to be supporting the industrial consumers and making sure those companies do come back and produce the goods and produce jobs on island. We want to make sure that all the different folks and who have different opinions about stuff can have their voices heard. So the societal concerns are pretty broad. And we think about the future of the electric power sector. There has been some talk of privatization of PREPA, and no opinion on whether that's the right answer or not. That's way more complicated than I have the information, or I don't have any constituency in Puerto Rico. So I don't have a perspective on that. But if we do decide, or if the people of Puerto Rico do decide that the right answer is to privatize PREPA, there's going to be a lot of challenges in thinking about what is the role of the utility and how the utility is going to be compensated, what the business model is going to be for the utility. So lots of challenges there. And then finally, there's just this fundamental consumer challenge, the societal challenge we have, in which oftentimes utilities look at the central design system as being the source of value, and distributed resources just being a challenge and being a threat to the stability of that central grid. And we have lots of customers who believe, no, actually all the value is in the distributed. We heard from the speaker on the video that there's a belief that actually the system is just a legacy. It's a sunk cost. It's a stranded cost. It's actually a burden on the system or on our society. And what we need to be thinking about is the distributed resources as being a source of value. And I believe there's actually neither are entirely correct. We really need both to have the most viable, the most efficient system that we want to have. And of course, we need to think about what is the pace of change that we're going to experience. 2040 seems like a long time away, but the planning decisions for what's going to happen in 2040 are being made right now. And while there may be an opportunity, given the state of the power system today, again, it goes back to, are we restoring for the immediate humanitarian issue or restoring for this future, and how do we weigh that balance? And then talk a little bit about the future business model. So continuing with that idea that if there is, whether there's privatization or not, this actually applies regardless of the business model of the utility. We have to think about the role of the utility. Is the utility going to be that infrastructure connector? Are they sizing the system to allow for consumers to produce their own power? Are they going to have a role in the actual sale and deployment or the financing of consumer solutions, or is that going to be left to other folks? So there are lots of questions out there. What SEPA has developed with what we've been calling our 51st State Initiative is a open collaboration from a variety of experts across the spectrum. So we've got utilities that are thinking in a very traditional mindset, renewable energy companies that are thinking very aggressively. We've got academics, we've got environmental NGOs, folks like the Rocky Mountain Institute and Energy Innovation, thinking about how can we come together and come develop a toolkit for folks thinking about how to navigate all these challenges that we're faced with. And we split up our initiative into three bits. Perspectives is research on what's been going on across the country. We've written some papers on California and New York's transition. We have a paper on Illinois, and we're in the process of writing a paper about Massachusetts. We have our ideas work, which brings together all these various experts and gets them to challenge and think about what are the most creative things they can come up with, and let's debate and provide peer review. And then publish interesting ideas there. And then we have our action, which is developing that toolkit and seeing how we can apply it in particular jurisdictions. We have not yet to date applied a holistic toolkit for transformation, but we have taken parts of that toolkit and applied it in a couple different places. We've done some work in Tennessee Valley Authority's area around how solar should be valued. We've done some work in Montana, helping the utility manage stakeholder input on some pilots and some R&D work. And then we've recently done some work in the small town of Glasgow, Kentucky, to help them think about rates and how they want to restructure their rates to encourage the behaviors to manage the impact consumers have on the system so that everyone can have a more affordable and a more environmentally sustainable energy system. So far, our toolkit consists of a couple different frameworks we've developed, but the key really is not just the toolkit, but it is who is at the table. And so right now, I think it's been mentioned, most of our energy decisions are made from the top. They're made by the utilities and our senior elected officials who may or may not have the expertise necessary to challenge or question the utilities. But we also need to bring in other folks as well, and I think it's really great to hear about the bottom-up perspective and the middle perspectives as well. And so the toolkit we're looking to develop and are in the process of developing really is looking to see how can we get all those voices in and rebalance and reconfigure how we think about energy, considering all the changes we have in technology, the changes in our policy outcomes and the societal issues, as well as the changing customer expectation set. So the latest work we have is we just published 13 expert crowdsourced white papers on this question of what is the future role of the utility. The role of the utility had been historically defined based on the concept of the natural monopoly, which is an economic concept, which basically says it makes more sense in certain industries based on the cost structure for one organization to provide the service as opposed to having competition. think about it having poles and wires installed. It makes sense for one company to have that infrastructure developed. And so coming with that franchise to be that monopoly that provides that service, there are questions about, well, what do we expect in exchange? And that is the foundation of what's known as the regulatory compact. And so we can put on that utility or on that monopoly a set of expectations. One is that we'll provide access to all power, or access to for all consumers to the electricity. The utility cannot pick and choose who they provide power to. They have to provide power for all. But we also have other things that are less clearly defined, like there's an expectation the utility is providing some level of insurance. Here in all the states, the utility has a role in hedging the cost or hedging the risks from commodity price fluctuations. The utility has a role in hedging risks. If your transformer gets run over by a drunk driver, they're going to come in and fix that and not charge the 5 or 6 houses that were served by that transformer, but charge all the consumers in the service territory. And so those things are understood in practice, but are not really clearly articulated, and that causes challenges when we think about what the future role of the utility ought to be. We got to think about where the regulated monopoly should be allowed to compete with other third parties in providing key services. And we got to think about where the utility monopoly should be prohibited from operating to make sure there's clear access and clear opportunity for other folks to compete. So I mentioned we've had 13 submissions. These are a few of the logos from some of the organizations that have provided their perspective on this question on what the role of the utility should be. I would encourage you guys to check it out at SEPA51.org if you're interested. We've just published a reading guide which has a summary of the papers, so instead of reading 13 20-page papers, you can take a look and get a little bit of a guide from a paragraph from each. And we'll be producing more material about these papers and continuing the conversation going forward. So with that, that's my last slide. It is a real challenge to see what's happening to our fellow Americans down on the island. It's kind of hard to even believe. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, there was a period of about 3 weeks where the water utility had turned off water to the community I was living in because of a non-payment of bills from a couple of customers there. And I mean, there were riots in the streets, and there were all sorts of things going on. Luckily, people understood I was outside of the fray, and so we didn't have any challenges from a security perspective. But life was much harder just without water. And so to imagine, and that was an artificial, and after 2 weeks, the political back and forth, it was restored. And to think that we've got fellow citizens down on island for as long as they have without access to this stuff is really heartbreaking. So I would encourage everyone to think about there may be a role, and we've been seeing some great humanitarian help from the solar industry, from the battery industry going down there. We should absolutely be encouraging that. My organization has raised some money for some of that immediate humanitarian relief. But we also got to be thinking about how does that transition effectively and making sure we don't end up locking ourselves in decisions that we'll regret later, and making sure that the requests we have from Congress are going to be things that are aligned with that future vision as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you. That was terrific, and such also an important reminder in terms of thinking about the enormous humanitarian challenges. I mean, because it's almost incomprehensible to think what so many people have been dealing with now for so long, and at the same time to know that we need to be on a parallel path in terms of thinking about what this really means for the future and what that infrastructure will look like in terms of providing better services for the longer term. So I now would like to turn quickly to Michael Panfil, who is a senior attorney and director of federal energy policy for EDF's Clean Energy Program, where his work includes working in regulatory efforts at the federal, state, and local levels across the country to design more environmentally friendly, economic, and efficient electric systems. He also has been working on efforts to reduce emissions throughout the U.S. by advocating deployment of smarter technology, improved design standards, as well as sustainable practices, all of which are important things that need to be integrated. He has been focusing on issues before federal agencies, including a number of very major orders before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And he has also worked on advocating for demand response, smart grid technologies, and time variant pricing enhancements in California and New York, all of which relate to our whole discussion here tonight. So, Michael?
Buddy? I'm just going to try to hold this. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, excellent. Okay. Sorry, my voice is going a little bit, but I'm going to try to speak up as much as possible. But if you're in the back, just wave your hand if you can't hear me. Perfect. So we've been talking a lot about distributed generation and microgrids. Fun fact, Denmark leads the world in the most distributed generation in the world, with over 50%. Anybody know what the second one is? It's Cuba. Yeah, the slide was a big hint. Cuba has about 42% distributed generation, and we're going to talk about why. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about why, or what I want to sort of focus on here today. I work at Environmental Defense Fund. We have these 4 separate programs. Our oceans team has been working in Cuba for over a decade. And over the past several years, they've been looking at ways that they might be able to apply their experience, work, and knowledge there in other ways. A few years ago, we talked about ways that the climate energy team, the one I sit on, and the oceans team might work together. And one of the questions was, are there places along the electric grid where we might be able to share experiences or knowledge? And this turned into a lengthy report that we published about 3 weeks ago on Cuba's electric grid. And quite a few of those recommendations are ones that are very specific to Cuba, but because it is both an island and because it does have such a high penetration of distributed generation for a few other reasons that we'll talk about today, may be applicable here. So just very quickly, Environmental Defense Fund, combination of sound science, corporate partnerships, market solutions, nonpartisan policy. The goal, simply put, is similar to the goal that I've heard repeated earlier today. We want to figure out solutions that are enduring, solutions that are based on fact, upon evidence, ones that are sustainable, and ones that are affordable. I'm going to talk a little bit about Cuba's electric grid, and we start with the generation mix. As you'll see there, it's dominated by fuel oil, about 80%, with only 4% renewable energy. The 80% fuel oil that you see comes mostly in the form of 9 power plants, natural gas, 3 natural gas plants. They added a third a few years ago. The 30 to 40% domestic is supplemented by almost half, which mostly comes from Venezuela through a barter agreement. As I mentioned to begin this conversation, it has about 42% distributed generation, which is second in the world. That number is difficult to square with that resource mix. The reason why is because much of that distributed generation is fuel oil. It's really dirty. It's really high in pollutants that damage the air quality, increase health concerns throughout the country, but also leads to failure rates that are much higher than you would experience if you weren't using really, really dirty fuel sources. Another picture of the distributed generation. So certainly with that distributed generation, you get both positives and negatives. The reason why Cuba has so much distributed generation, though, I think is interesting and relevant here. They had a centralized system for many years. In the mid-2000s, it was hit by a number of hurricanes. The response was to build that distributed generation system. Of the municipalities in Cuba, all except for about 50 have some form of DG. But again, it is that very, very dirty fuel mix. Yeah, so sorry, and I should hold this a little bit closer too. Distributed generation, what I mean by that is in contrast with centralized generation. So when you think of a normal electric grid, you start with a large centralized power plant, right? Imagine the thing with smokestacks, right? Or my preference, the large solar panels or wind turbines, which then runs along large transmission lines, which is at a really, really high voltage. It's then ramped down substations and sent through distribution lines at a lower voltage, where it's then consumed at homes and businesses, right? Transmission lines and distribution lines, those are the ones that are most vulnerable, right? I'm pretty sure it's 0.0007% of all outages are related to the generation itself, which means the 99.9997% are related to those transmission and distribution failures. In other words, it's the thing that transports the electricity. So distributed generation is generation that lies on the distribution line, lies very close, that's either co-located with the consumption or very close to it. So rooftop solar is distributed generation. A microgrid, right, is a cluster of distributed generation. 30 diesel, generally backup. Generators are also distributed generation, just a form of generation. It's very dirty. On the demand side, right, so we've just talked about the consumption, moves along, and then used by homes and businesses. We see electricity costs roughly 14% of GDP in Cuba. It's higher on average than most countries, which is around 10%. And although the rate to the consumer is heavily subsidized, what we found is in comparison to the average wage, it's actually pretty close. Consumption is increasing, 66.5% in the residential sector over the last decade. Just from 2014 to 2015, it was close to 5% increase island-wide. The way that that energy is priced either comes through a tiered rate, which is actually supposed to incent conservation, or a time of use rate for industry, which means it varies by time and day. So that's where Cuba's electric grid stands today. But for a variety of reasons, they are at an inflection point. The first reason why is a commitment that they have signed in the Paris Agreement, 24% renewable generation by 2030. They're at 4% currently. 24% is an incredibly laudable goal. It's also going to be a very difficult goal to achieve. The second reason why, as I mentioned on, I think, the first slide, about half of Cuba's imports provide power to their electric grid, and most of that comes from Venezuela through a barter agreement. Much of that barter agreement is diminishing, so they're going to need to find a fuel source other than Venezuela in the near future, very likely. And the third reason they're an inflection point is because they're one of the few countries where you're seeing demand, where you're seeing the consumption of energy increase at a really, really quick rate. And so they're going to need to increase capacity, and they're going to need to increase the ability to serve that demand pretty quickly. I want to mention here one particular success story around energy efficiency. Cuba was similarly at an inflection point about 10 or 15 years ago, where they had a previous barter agreement in place, again, for fuel oil. That barter agreement was terminated. They were looking for a new one, and they needed to reduce their demand or increase their supply another way, and they use energy efficiency as one of the key tools there. They reduced consumption by around 3 to 4% annually through energy efficiency. This is simply appliance retrofits. More efficient appliances, and that saw a 3 to 4% reduction. That was accomplished in 6 months. That's incredibly quick, but that shows that that can be done. Here's how Cuba proposes to meet their 24% goal in 2030, and you're going to see it's basically a three-way split between wind, solar, and bioelectric. This is biogas, mostly from their sugarcane industry. So on the basis of this study, we came to a few recommendations, and I've taken a few here. The full list is available in the study. I've got the link to that at the end. But I wanted to highlight these 5 because I think they are relevant not only for Cuba, but I think in this context as well, or at least ones to consider. And the first one really is the basis for many of these recommendations, which is knowledge sharing. I heard a few different nonprofits mentioned, RMI being one, are trying to connect similar grids, places where shared experience can be connected. Denmark actually, before building their distributed generation system, embarked on a very similar knowledge sharing experience and learned, for instance, that a Muni-driven approach was the right one, and that was when they came to after a long set of conversations. The second recommendation we have for the Cuban electric grid is renewable energy in a DG system. And part of this is because that system already exists in large part, right? It's 42%. And the reason why we think renewable energy may make a lot of sense is, yes, because it's clean, and as an environmental NGO, we support the clean alternative solution. We also believe that it's likely the most affordable solution. Compared to a transparent price of fuel oil, which has to be imported, it is very likely that renewable energy is the more affordable option, is the cheaper option. Part of this is because Cuba does have fantastic solar and wind resources, but another reason why is because the cost of fuel oil, and the reason why many islands' electricity costs are much higher than other countries or places, is because they need to import the fuel. Renewable energy, where you don't need to import fuel, could be much, much more affordable. The third recommendation is expanded energy efficiency. This is energy efficiency not only at the home in the form of appliance retrofits or upgrading to smarter, better, cleaner technology, but also along the lines. So we talked about the transmission and distribution lines. There are ways to increase the efficiency of those lines. Fourth, microgrids at high demand locations, which I've heard a few others talk about. Clusters of critical buildings or infrastructure, places where energy consumption is really high, can be particularly well suited for microgrids, places where in the aftermath of an extreme weather event or a storm or a hurricane can be used or be turned on in a way that doesn't require the entire grid to be turned on. Lastly, investing in a diverse mix of lower carbon resources. This is tied up to the idea that we need to have a transparency about the cost of different energy resources. And generally, in Cuba, what we've seen bear out is a very high likelihood that renewable energy and energy efficiency are going to be the most affordable choices. I would also mention here one finding as well was not only is this the most affordable, is this the cleanest, it's also generally the quickest. It's usually far quicker to install solar DG, solar distributed generation, for instance, than it is building an entire power plant from scratch. I want to close with a few thoughts, turning from Cuba to the topic at hand, and want to mention the EDF is indeed doing what we can and working to be as helpful as possible, trying to take what we've learned here from what we've seen in Cuba and apply it to Puerto Rico, working with local partners, and trying to leverage other parts of the team. From what we've seen, many of these recommendations could be applicable in Puerto Rico. From what we've seen, rebuilding the old grid could be more expensive and slower than other options like distributed generation solar and batteries, which seem likely to be faster and cheaper and cleaner. And so what we're doing is exploring and talking with others and seeing whether or not and how there can be places for us to help support folks on the ground, be that through analysis of various options and cost, working with our engineering team to understand distributed generation and how it would apply in this particular context, and working with corporate partners and alternative financing to make sure that we're getting and finding pathways for capital to those who need or could use it the most. I will just close by sharing the web address to the full report should anybody be interested in. Thank you so much.
So I now am very, very glad that we are going to be hearing from the person who happens to be our last speaker before we open it up for your questions and comments. And I think that it rounds out our presentations in a very, very important and helpful way. And our final speaker is Ramón Luis Nieves, who is a former state senator for the District of San Juan, Puerto Rico. He also had been a former vice president of a financial institution, has been an attorney for about 2 decades. But during his tenure in the Senate of Puerto Rico, he served as chairman of the Committee on Energy, as well as the Committee on Banking, Insurance, and Telecommunications. While in the Senate, he championed energy reform, which resulted in the creation of the Energy Commission, or the local Public Utilities Commission, and that also created new mandates for PREPA and the energy sector overall. He sponsored legislation which reformed and or eliminated energy subsidies, including legislative mandates to prohibit political intervention in PREPA that involved, for example, procurement, employees, fundraising, etc. And he also has sponsored legislation to facilitate net metering and to authorize microgrids and community shared solar. So he has really worked very diligently in the whole forward-looking policy energy sector, and so I am very much looking forward to hearing his remarks as we look at how best to move forward to address this major, major catastrophe, and now the need to put solutions in place. Ramón?
How do I do this? We'll go this here?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
Yeah. Good evening. First of all, I wanted to be original. I wanted to stand out of the crowd of these great experts, so I decided not to bring my own slides. And obviously, after 60 days, where I have not been able to return to my law office because I don't have power in my law offices, I have a great excuse for not bringing the slides. So we'll just enjoy the polar bear We don't have birds in Coupé, but it's a great bird. First of all, thank you, Adil, Aniel. Thank you, everybody that put this event together. And I wanted to really, I'm really grateful as a Puerto Rican, and there are a lot of people from the diaspora here. I'm very grateful that we are here on a Friday evening discussing energy. And I have to tell you that after several years of working in the Senate of Puerto Rico, working with the issue of energy and energy reform, I am more than convinced that solving the energy situation of Puerto Rico is key for the next decades and for the actual recovery of our economy, of our society. It could be maybe kind of irresponsible to try to find one silver bullet to try to solve all of Puerto Rico's economic and social problems. But if there was a silver bullet, energy will be it. I'm really grateful, and I thank the Almighty that we have heard about all of that data from these experts. They're great experts in their fields. And it's a great advantage for me because I don't have to get into a lot of the technical stuff. But as you well heard, these experts have communicated what could be difficult concepts in such an easy way to understand them. And so I guess this event is great for that. I'm going to talk to you about the energy situation of Puerto Rico from a public policy, really, because we have been discussing the issue of microgrids, the possibilities of creating a new energy model for Puerto Rico. But at the end of the day, we have to make decisions. And in a democracy, decisions are made by the people through their policymakers. And so we have to talk about PREPA a little bit. We have to talk about Congress. We have to talk about Puerto Rico's future. First of all, everybody knows in this room that Hurricane Maria, hurricane Category 5 storm, devastated the island. There are people right now, 60 days after Maria, who lack electricity and water in their homes. 140,000 residents of Puerto Rico have fled to Florida, just to Florida. Nobody knows the actual, or at least I don't know, the actual figures of people who are leaving Puerto Rico for New York, D.C., Texas. Business are closing down. Businesses in Puerto Rico have been really affected by a 11-year economic depression. So for a lot of business, Maria really was the last straw, and they have been closing down in the past weeks because people are dying. The actual death toll of Maria will never be known. The government states that only 60 persons have died directly as a cause of Hurricane Maria. Well, how about people who depended on energy to sustain life because they have machines in their homes because of their respiratory problems? How about people who were already sick but had a chance to live. And now because they lack electricity, they have been dying. Some may say, well, that guy was already sick. Yeah, but he could have lived longer if he had electricity. I submit to you that Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. But Hurricane Prepa is killing people, it's killing our economy, and it's forcing thousands of Puerto Ricans to leave Puerto Rico. I had to take 3 planes to come over here to Washington, D.C. This is my second time in D.C. in the past few weeks. I had to come here, I had to go to the Dominican Republic. I felt like Tom Hanks in the terminal. You remember the terminal? I was Tom Hanks. I was talking with people for several hours there, stranded. I had to go to Miami and then to Baltimore. When I arrived to Baltimore, very tired, they told me, yeah, but we left your luggage at Miami, so that happened to me. Because people are leaving the island by the thousands, and the airports are so full. But at the end of the day, energy equals life. And what has happened from a public policy side, all of the great ideas that we have to decentralize our energy system, to integrate microgrids, to create community shared solar systems, especially for our poor neighborhoods. I have a dream that one day I'll be walking the streets of San Juan, of a barrio, in the G8, the poor neighborhoods of San Juan. And now, if you walk, as I did many times as Senator of San Juan, sometimes I was walking, either campaigning or just visiting, and I saw two poor houses, and in between those 2 houses, there was a space. Maybe it's a vacant space or something. I always said, someday I want that space to be occupied by a solar system. That we can get a community shared solar system going on for people to lower their energy costs. It can be done. But all of these ideas face some challenges, and I hope that after we have heard from all of these great experts, I would like to provide some of those challenges that we have, not to be pessimistic, but to know who our enemies. What are the challenges of decentralizing our energy system and create a new energy and economic reality for Puerto Rico? So let's talk about PREPA for a little bit, shall we? So most of you know, PREPA was created in the 1940s as a public corporation with a legal monopoly over energy. PREPA controlled the 4 elements of the energy system: generation, transmission, distribution, and customer service. I have to tell you, in 40 years, in just 40 years, PREPA did an excellent thing, an excellent achievement. It completely electrified the island of Puerto Rico in 40 years. To me, that's an amazing achievement from PREPA for a poor country as Puerto Rico has always been. It was an amazing achievement. But what happened during that process? All of you who are lawyers, or some of you who are lawyers, know, and everybody that knows politics know, that in a Republican form of government, we have 3 political powers, 3 powers of government. We have the judicial branch, legislative branch, executive branch. And in Puerto Rico, we have PREPA. we have 4 branches of government. PREPA became this powerful political entity. And I know my good friend and former President of the Senate, Kenneth McClintock, who's here. I didn't know you were here, and it's great to have you here. Kenneth has been a great champion of energy, and he's the father of net metering in Puerto Rico, the Law 114 of 2007, and Wheeling, Law 73 of 2008. And it's very interesting to show you one of the reasons why PREPA got so powerful. Senator McClintock told me one day, when I passed the net metering law, somebody from PREPA told me, okay, you passed the net metering law. We won't implement it. We don't care. In 2008, the private sector, specifically the manufacturing sector, was asking for PREPA to regulate wheeling. We'll have created a great advantage for industry in Puerto Rico, for manufacture, to lower their energy costs. Under that law, Law 73, PREPA had to regulate wheeling by 2010. 2017, Puerto Rico has no wheeling regulation. PREPA started working on the regulations, but then they just stopped. They didn't care. Talking about net metering, PREPA was putting a lot of technical obstacles for people to have net metering, to have power systems in their homes with a net metering agreement with PREPA. In 2014, we found out from several energy companies that work in Puerto Rico that the slowest state to interconnect your system with a utility, Maryland, interconnected your system in 75 days. Puerto Rico is 250 days. That's the average. So we have a utility that embraced oil. They love oil. They oppose renewables. Plus, they have two additional problems that are very important for our discussion. When our economy started, when the depression started in our economy in 2006, PREPA did as the rest of the government of Puerto Rico did. They borrowed. Started borrowing like madmen. Just in 2010, PREPA did, and the government of Puerto Rico at that time did, 8 bond issues for the total amount of more than $4 billion in 1 year. They did an additional bond issue in 2012 of $650 million. And then in 2013, PREPA did a bond issue of $673 million. So by 2014, PREPA became insolvent. Before that 2013 bond issue, the Senate of Puerto Rico, then presided by our good friend Eduardo Batia, who's a great champion of energy reform, decided to hold a hearing to call the PREPA guys. So PREPA tried to, so they explained or something, why were they trying to borrow $673 million. And after the hearing, we concluded that PREPA was lying to us and was lying to the market.